Okay, here we are. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at ID Exchange in Cambridge, Ontario. Welcome to A World Beneath Your Feet. Meet the soil critters up close. So, did you know that the ground beneath your feet is bursting with life? Beyond worms, ants, centipedes, and millipedes, soil is home to countless microscopic critters which work together to help grow our food and keep our planet healthy. And we are here with Renee Claude, Science Advisor for the Agriculture Museum in Ottawa. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you. All right.
So if you guys have any questions at any time, you can ask them in the Zoom screen, or you can ask them on the YouTube chat. And when question and answer time comes, I will read them out, and Renee Claude will answer them for us. So without further ado, go take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you today to talk about one of my favorite things is soil life. So it is gardening season finally. Well, maybe where you are in Ottawa, it's still pretty cold. It's actually pretty chilly today. So plants are not happy with this type of weather. But as you start digging your hands into your soil this spring, you might encounter all kinds of living creatures in the soil. And as we said in the description of the program, these are all super important to help make our plants grow and to get good harvests. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about these critters, and we're going to look at the ones that we need a microscope to see, that we might not really be able to see with our eyes. And I've got some little samples that I prepared ahead of time here. So this is a microscope slide that I'm showing you. And on here, there are some soil critters. We can't see them yet. We're going to use this digital microscope here. Whoops. This digital microscope that's plugged into my computer. Got little lights and a little lens down here, and it'll allow us to look at these cool critters up close. We'll also look at some earthworms and look a little bit at their anatomy. So what's inside of an earthworm? So before getting into the microscopes, I'm just going to share a couple slides here. All right. So what do we get from the soil? Why was soil so important? Well, we get our food, and we can get lettuce, and then also our food's food. So if you eat chicken or beef and pork, things like that, well, they eat plants from the ground. We can get fibers, like, for example, cotton that's used for a t-shirt. That's a plant, and that grows in the soil. We also get wood, lumber, to build our houses, to build all kinds.
Renee, I think you may have muted your audio or something. I can't hear you.
Oh, no. Just 1 second.
1 second, everyone. Oh, everyone else can hear. Maybe it's just me. Oh, okay, continue. I'm going to check my headphones. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so now folks can't hear. I don't think it's me. Did you click share sound, Renee? Okay, now I can hear you.
Now you can hear me. Okay,
That's
this is very
strange.
strange.
Yeah.
I can try something else. I have like a secondary microphone, which might work. Okay.
I think everyone can hear you now, though.
Okay. So just to recap, in case you missed, so we've got our food, fiber, lumber, fuel. I'll just keep the chat open so I can see right away. And medication. So medication, like antibiotics, if you've ever had to take antibiotics before, those are often made by soil critters such as bacteria and fungi, like these two here. This here is a penicillium mushroom. So it's a representation of it. And this is actually where our penicillin, our antibiotic, was discovered. And some bacteria can make some medicines that are very, very useful for you. Okay, so let's go. Okay, I hope you can still hear me. So what is soil made of? Well, it's made of 3 different mineral components. We have sand, which is big particles, silt, medium-sized chunks, and clay, which is kind of like a book. It's like made of pages all clumped together. So those are the 3 main components of soil. But if we take a tube and put it in the soil and pull it out, we'll get a soil core. And what do we see? Well, we can see some little roots. We can see that there's holes. Do you see right over here at the top, there's a little hole. I wonder who did that. So the soil is actually more than just dirt. It's also made up of all kinds of living things, including plants, and also something we call organic matter. Organic matter is basically rotten, dead stuff. And how does it get that way? Well, we have our soil critters to thank. So when we compost at home, for example, we compost food scraps, or at the farm, we have a lot of animal poop to deal with. So the Agriculture Museum, we have dairy cows that make milk and they poop a lot every day. We compost it so that it can be added back to our soil. And also dead leaves and branches and things like that on the ground. All of those are food for the little critters that live underground. When they eat this, they turn it into compost, which is food for plants and for small critters like bacteria. Some of the critters that we can see with our eyes, we have earthworms, millipedes. These here have a lot of different names. Some people call them roly-polies. They're actually a land crustacean. So that means they're kind of like crabs and lobsters, but they don't live in the water. They live on the ground and they love to eat rotten wood. We also have ants. So these are the critters you might find when you're digging around in your garden. But today we're going to use the microscope to look at the very important ones we can't just see. And if you have a microscope at home, you'd be able to find them too. So before we jump into the microscope, I just wanted to show you these two. So in the soil, we have mushrooms or fungi. When you dig around in the ground, sometimes you can find something white like this that looks like a net. It looks fuzzy, almost like cotton. That's mushroom. And mushroom feeds on dead stuff and again, turns it into compost. So these critters are actually the recyclers of the earth. They're very, very important because without them, we just have piles of dead stuff piling up and no food for plants. And then today we won't be able to see bacteria because my microscope isn't powerful enough. But if you had a very big, very powerful microscope, you would be able to see bacteria. Now, bacteria, they're everywhere. We're covered in bacteria. They're all over inside of us. There's some good bacteria and bad bacteria. The good bacteria, they help plants grow. They help us be healthy, whereas bad bacteria can make us sick. But in the soil, we find mostly good bacteria, though we can have some that can make us sick. Usually, most of them are helpful to plants by helping them protect them from disease. by turning compost directly into plant food that the plants can drink up in the water. Now, today, I'm going to introduce you to critters that live in my vermicompost bin. So you might be able to see in this photo some red, slimy wigglers here. These are called red wigglers, and they're a special type of worm. So these earthworms, they can eat as much as their own weight every single day. So they are very, very, very hungry worms. And over here, you might see there's some spinach leaves, and I think this might be some sort of apple peel or something. So a vermicompost bin, I'll just stop sharing my screen so I can show you what it looks like. It's just a big box like this, a big bin that inside contains some earthworms. And we also put shredded paper. So I'm just going to tilt my camera so you can see better. So we can see we have some shredded paper in here. And if I dig deeper and deeper, we start to find some old food scraps like banana peels. And the deeper we go, you might not be able to see very well. It's quite dark. The deeper we go, we find, okay, I've got a handful of it here. We find compost. So this here in my hand is called vermicompost, vermicast. And as you can see, it's actually full of earthworms. So these are red wigglers. And what they do is they eat the food that we put inside of their house, inside of the bin, and they eat it and turn it into compost, which we can then add to our garden to feed our plants. So this is how you would recycle food at home in your kitchen. And these are quite easy to build. And at the end, I can explain really briefly how you can make your own. The tricky part is actually finding the right worms to do the job. The big fishing worms we find, the big European night crawlers, we call them, the big dew worms that are all long and chunky, they're not really great at composting or recycling food because they like to live very deep in the ground. For composting food, we want some worms that like being at the surface, and that's what these ones are. Now, the worms are not alone in that bin. So the worms, they are very good at eating and pooping and making little crumbs of compost just like this between my fingers. But they need the help of their friends, and that's who we're going to look at today. So, as I said, I've got my little slides here with some live critters that we're actually going to look at, and we'll see them move. So the first one I have to show you is called a mite. And soil mites are very, very abundant. That means there's a lot of them. And what they do is they shred apart the food or the leaves or anything you put in the compost, and they turn it into kind of a soft substance that the other critters can start to eat. So without further ado, I will switch over to my microscope camera. Can you still hear me? Okay. I hope you can still hear me. Okay. All right. So these mites here, I'm just going to make sure. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for confirming. When I switched my camera earlier, it made me go quiet. So here we are. I've found them. So now I just need to put the focus. So these mites here, oh, so they're kind of, the one on the left is kind of stuck in the gel. So I have a special gel here that allows me to make a little environment for them to stay in while we look at them. So these here, they're kind of in the same family as bed bugs, but they don't bite humans or animals. They are vegetarian. They only eat some stuff we find in the ground. So you can see they're kind of trying to escape. They're trying to dig their way out. And again, I don't have my microscope on a very high magnification right now. So all you need is a little digital microscope like this, and you can easily spot these. Now, in reality, with my naked eyes, they look like little strawberry seeds. So they're kind of hard to find. But once you get used to finding these guys, they're super fun to look at. So we have two different kinds. You can see there's one that's a little bit more white and one that's a little bit more brown on top. So there's a lot of different kinds of soil mites. And they're very important because, as I said, they help break apart the food and make it available to smaller critters. I'm just going to flip it over so we can look at the other side of the slide here. See another angle. This one's stuck in the gel a little bit. But the gel is good because it slows these critters down. They're quite fast and sometimes difficult to observe. So I'm going to try to get as close as I can to this one here that's a little stuck and struggling. They look like ticks. They do. They're actually in the same group of animals as ticks. But ticks, they feed on the blood of animals and humans, which we are animals too. But these ones, they cannot bite. They don't have the piercing teeth. I can't get, we're lacking a bit of light to get any closer, but I'm trying to see if we can look at their head. Aha. So I'll get even closer in so that we can see how their mouth is a little bit different from the ones that bite. No, we can't. Oh, here we go. It's a little blurry, but that's actually what we're looking at right now is the mouth. And it's not a piercing mouth. It's more like a sucking mouth, kind of like flies, like the flies that come around and dab up the food that we leave on our plates. So I'm just going to zoom back out here so we can go and see. I spotted another critter right here that got caught in my gel. I hadn't planned for this, but this one here is called a collembola, or another name for them is springtails. And that's because they have like a little spring underneath their tail that allows them to jump very, very, very far. And these are very important. They're also decomposers. So they also break apart the food for smaller critters. Scientists usually will count the amount of collembolas that are in the soil sample to kind of see how healthy the soil is. So if a soil has been polluted, collembola won't like to live there. So that's one way that we can tell if a soil is healthy or not, or if it has a lot of nutrients, is if it contains these springtails. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the next slide. We are going to look, well, I had my slide of springtails, so let's try to find them under the microscope here. Okay, so I have a little well. Ooh. So it's a little tricky because at first you have to try to find something and then you can adjust. Aha. All right. Oh, here it is. So I called them springtails, and maybe you can see why now. Do you see that little fork on the end of their body? So right over here, we have this little fork, and that's usually folded underneath their belly. And when they deploy it, they make it unfold from under their belly. It makes them fly. They go pew and fly really far away, so they can jump really, really far. And so they're really bouncy. And sometimes we see them as little white specks bouncing around. So I'll try to get in closer so we can look at its eyes. So they do have tiny little eyes, just like us. Oh, their eyes are a little bit different than ours, though. They're more called eye spots. So their eyes are much simpler than ours. It's got little antennae. It's got its legs and the little fork in the back. And there you can see they're kind of fuzzy. Now, these ones, as I said, when we look at them with just our eyes, they just look like little white moving dots. So it's really cool to be able to see them under the microscope like this. Okay, so it's not moving. It's been in the water for a bit. So I think it's no longer active. All right, so let's just see. I'm going to scan to see if we can find more. There's another one here. So this brown stuff here is actually, whoops, I'm just going to bring it up. This is actually our compost here. So all of this brown stuff that you see, this used to be food, and it's all been broken apart into compost now. That was our springtails. Next up, we have the cousins of earthworms. These are called potworms. And these worms here, well, they look like they might be baby earthworms, actually, but they never get bigger. They stay very, very tiny. And here you can see them move. Now they help with decomposing food, making food into compost. They only have a little tiny mouth, but they don't have teeth. So they need to slurp up food that's been decomposed already or shred apart by the two other critters that we've seen so far. So this here, I'm just following it. That's its head. They're following the edge of the little chamber I made. So again, these are not earthworms, even though they look like earthworms. They're just their cousins. And they're called potworms. Now, these ones are pretty common in my vermicompost bin, and they love things that are starchy, such as bread and pizza crust. So we don't want to put too much bread or pizza crust or things like that in our compost, because these guys will explode. There'll be so many of them, and they're a little icky looking because they're white and short, but they make great fish food. So if you have an aquarium at home, these are excellent food for fish. You can see them squirming. You can see their last meal inside of them here. And this is, again, a chunk of compost in the corner. All right. So next, I'll show you a baby earthworm. So this baby earthworm here is also in water. And I'm hoping you can see its hearts. So an earthworm actually has 5 little hearts, and you can see them here. And do you see the red stripe on the back? That's the vein that goes from the head all the way to the bum. So you might have heard that if you cut a worm in half, it'll make 2 worms. I have some bad news. That is actually not the truth. If you cut a worm in half, you'll make 2 dead worms. So, as you can see, a worm needs its hearts in order to live, just like us. Oh, here we go. We see it really well when the worm stretches out. Here we go. So the worm needs its hearts and its intestines. So all of the brown here is actually the worm's last meal. So when the worm eats, it goes through its body all the way to the end, and it'll poop it out right at the end. We can't see its bum right now. It's hidden. But this baby worms are really fun to look at because they're really see-through. Grown-up worms are a little less see-through. But you can really see the blood pumping. So let's just try to get a good focus. Do you see how the red is pulsating? So it's red and then not red, and red then not red. So that's actually the little hearts beating the worm's blood all through its body. And so I wanted to show you another thing on these little worms. I'll need to get a little closer, I think. So worms, how do they move around without slipping? Because if you've ever held a worm in your hands, you might have noticed they're quite slippery. We don't see it really well on these worms, but do you see how there's kind of like spiky bits on the sides? Right here, actually, we can see it. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but on the left of the screen, we can kind of see the worm's little hairs. So earthworms have little hairs along each side of their body that allow them to grip into the soil in order to move. So you can kind of see them in this view here. And so if a bird comes around to try to pluck it out of the soil, their little hairs will allow them to stay in the ground and not get eaten by a bird. There we go. Oh, so you can kind of see them now. So I'll just look at our questions here. How big are they? Okay. Oh, and you can't hear. So I'll show you. So I'll just turn off the microscope now because I'm done showing you the very, very small critters, and I'll show you how big they are in reality. So the one I have here in this dish right here, that's a grown-up worm. The one we were looking at is this small. So I'm just going to put my finger next to it so you can see. It's right in here. That's the one we were looking at under the microscope. And then the other worms we were looking at are even smaller. You can barely see them. Now it's difficult to show you on my computer camera, but the little worm is actually in there and it's quite small. But the grown-up one, let me pinch it and pick it up. Whoops. Our grown-up worm is about this size here. Now, these worms like to live on top of the ground, and you'll find them in the forest, in the ground, and but not too deep. They like to live really close to the top. I'll just put it back in its dish. Oh, it's really stuck to me. Okay, back into the dish you go. Now, earthworms, they don't have eyes, but they have little spots all over their bodies where they can feel the light. And that's why I have a little box here and I'm hiding my worms under the box to keep them happy in the dark. Okay, so we're coming up to the end, and before I take any questions, I'm just going to show you real quick. If you want to make a vermicompost bin, so a bin where you can compost with worms at home and reduce your food scraps, what you need to do is get 2 plastic bins that fit inside the other. The top plastic bin, you have to drill holes at the bottom so that water can trickle through. The lid needs to have a bunch of holes as well so that there's a lot of air going in. And then, well, you just need to find some worms. So somebody who has worms and who is willing to give you some, or you can collect them in the wild, but only the small little ones will work. You put all of the worms in there with a little bit of soil and some newspaper or other shredded paper. And you start adding a little bit of food every couple days. And you watch it how it's disappearing. Once your compost bin, your vermicompost bin is in good shape, it'll be able to decompose food a lot faster. And then that way you'll be able to put a little bit more of your food. Now, it's very important to put the right things in. We don't want to put any meat. We don't want to put any dairy, so milk products or oils, because those attract the bad bugs and might make our compost smell. And also we want to avoid putting baked goods like bread or crust or things like that, because again, they will ferment. So that means there will be mushrooms that are going to start to eat it and it's going to smell a little funky. So let's have a look at some of our questions. Okay, so are there worms everywhere, like in Antarctica too? That is a really good question. So before we start, earthworms are actually not native to Canada. So all earthworms that we find here came here another way. They were actually wiped out last time that North America was under a big sheet of ice. So that's why we didn't have them here until people started bringing stuff over, like trees with roots or garden soil from other countries when they started to settle in Canada or Turtle Island. So earthworms weren't here, and now we find about 7 kinds here in Canada, but there's researchers doing projects to find out if there's more than 7. So are there worms everywhere? Now, pretty much, but places that are frozen, not really. So if you think in northern Canada, where we have something called permafrost, the soil is permanently frozen, We don't find any earthworms there because they can't burrow. But anywhere that's warm and has some soil, generally you'll find them. I know in Australia, there's some very, very big ones that are about this long and this thick. So there's all kinds of worms everywhere for all types of climates, but usually not in a frozen land. And okay, so we had another question. Could worms eat all our garbage, like for a whole city? They probably could, but it's probably part of a solution more than the only solution. So I know at the university where I went to, they had almost like a big room or a big bin about the size of a room that was full of worms, and they would compost all of the food for the cafeteria at the university, all of the food scraps. So you can do it, but for a whole city, you might need a lot of different worm bins because it's just the size that they need. We'd have a hard time having a worm bin big enough to eat the food scraps from everyone in the city. But this is a good solution for somebody who might live in an apartment building and can't compost because they don't have a yard, or the city doesn't pick up the compost from apartment buildings. I know in Ottawa, where I live, if you live in a condo or an apartment, there's no composting. But if you live in a house or something by the street, you can put your compost in a green bin and the city comes and pick it up. So that's something that we can do if we want to compost, but we don't have access to it otherwise. The next part about vermicomposting is that we do get a nice product at the end that we can use in our garden. So it's a good idea for gardeners too. So for smaller towns, maybe I think that could be a solution, but larger cities, we need a lot of different options for processing all of our food. Okay. Ooh, have they found worms on other planets? Not so far. So we haven't found worms on other planets yet. Doesn't mean we won't ever. They might be very, very small if we do, but not yet. Perhaps if humans ever colonize another planet, we might bring them along with us as our composters for our food scraps when we're living on Mars. But so far, they're just on planet Earth. Okay. Now, if you have any other questions about earthworms or how to make a vermicompost bin, the Agriculture and Food Museum in Ottawa, we have tons of resources online. So we have an educational activity kit called Handful of Soil. And in that one, there you can learn how to make your own vermicompost bin. And you can do all kinds of other fun soil and plant experiments. And you can always get in touch with us through email, and they'll make sure that it gets to me. So if you have a question for me specifically, you can reach me through contact@ingeniumcanada.org, or you can find me on Twitter at @RCBoulet. I'll just put that in the chat. There you go. Oh, I sent it directly to Brandon. Let's do that again. Okay. Okay. So if there's no other questions, that wraps it up for me. And I just wanted to thank Brandon for having me here today with you and showing you my vermicompost critters and vermicompost bin. I always love to look at things through the microscope. And again, these are not very expensive and they're super fun to play around with. It's a good way to explore things in the ground, explore things around the house. So I encourage you to go and grab a microscope, grab a magnifying glass, and start looking at the small things. Oh, which critter is the smallest? So today, the smallest one we looked at was our springtail, the one that I also call the collembola. So the springtails were the tiniest ones. But they're not the tiniest one in the vermicomposter. As I said, there are some smaller ones, but we can't see them with the microscope I have today. We need a more powerful one. And I have some teddies to show you. Now, this is what they would look like when we look at them in the microscope. So we need a very strong microscope to find these. This is called a rotifer, and there's a lot of that in the vermicompost. So these ones are little aquatic creatures, and they have little hairs on their mouth that wiggle and bring water inside their bodies, and they eat bacteria. So they kind of filter the small bacteria like these guys here, and that's what they eat. We also have other creatures like this euglena, which they kind of swim around, and they have a little mouth here that they slurp up some water with other dissolved stuff. Another one we didn't see today, but you might be able to see with a better microscope, is a nematode. There's a lot of different kinds of nematodes in the ground. There's a specific kind of worm. And these ones, well, there's some that eat plants. There's some that eat other nematodes. There's some that eat bacteria. And actually some plant diseases are caused by these. So not all nematodes are good. And finally, I already showed you about our fungus, like our penicillium here. That's something you would find in the soil. So what is your Ottawa connection again? Yeah, so it is a federal museum. So National Science and Technology Museum. Canada Agriculture and Food Museum is part of Ingenium, which includes the Science and Technology Museum and the Aviation and Space Museum, which are all located in Ottawa. So we have a collection of artifacts, and we also do programming, educational resources. And I encourage you also to check out our school programs if you're interested. We now do virtual school programs. So we can come to you virtually, just kind of like what I did today.
Thank you so much, Renee Claude. That was great to see earthworms and things so up close. And for those of you who are here in Cambridge, I'm going to paste a link into the chat. We actually have steam boxes, and one of our steam boxes contains a very high-powered microscope with slides of things you can look at, and you can borrow that and take it to your classroom if you're a teacher, or you can borrow it and take it home, or you can use it in our old post office location. So that's for those of you here in Cambridge. We've got all sorts of steam boxes around other themes. So everybody, let's give Renee Claude a big hand. Thank you for being.
Brandon, I think you shared it directly with me.
Oh, did I? Oh.
Yeah.
It wasn't where I. Thank you for catching that. There we go.
No problem. I think those look super fun. That's a great idea. I'm glad to hear about those.
Okay, so for those of you who didn't get to catch the start of it, it will be available on our YouTube page to watch again for a week, I think. So if you missed it the first time, we will see you in a bit. So thank you again very much. Bye-bye, everyone.